We're moving forward with an ambitious new plan, backed by more than $40 billion of investments in Canada's North and Arctic. Investments to defend our sovereignty and to deter new threats. Investments to connect, build, and transform Northern and Arctic communities. With this plan, we are taking control of our future. We will no longer rely on others to defend our Arctic security or to fuel our economy. We're taking full responsibility for defending our sovereignty. And we are unleashing a range of new economic opportunities for the over 140,000 Northerners who will benefit from stronger, more connected communities, more opportunities, and a higher standard of living.
Canada is quietly building something in the Arctic that could change its future forever. A massive project that once seemed impossible is suddenly moving ahead at a speed nobody expected, giving Canada a stronger presence in the north and opening new opportunities for growth. Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in Yellowknife and announced $40 billion in Arctic investment, the largest single commitment to Canada's north in the country's history. 3 days later, the Grays Bay Road and Port project was referred to the Federal Major Projects Office. Then, on May 20th, Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson flew to Iqaluit and announced up to $50 million in federal funding for the Grays Bay project's planning and pre-construction phase. A deepwater Arctic port is now moving from concept to federal commitment at a speed that has no precedent in modern Canadian infrastructure history, and almost nobody in Washington was paying attention. The Grays Bay Road and Port project is being developed by West Kitikmeot Resources Corporation, an Inuit-led company based in Nunavut's Kitikmeot region. The project involves two components: a proposed deepwater Arctic port at Grays Bay on the Arctic coast of Nunavut, and a 230-kilometer all-season road linking that port to the Slave Geological Province, one of the most mineral-rich and least accessible geological formations in the entire country. The road would unlock future development of zinc and copper deposits in Canada's central Arctic that currently have no viable route to market. Without year-round road access and a marine terminal, those deposits remain stranded regardless of how high global prices for critical minerals climb. This project will strengthen Canada's Arctic sovereignty, unlock critical minerals, improve access and affordability for the region, and create lasting prosperity for Northerners and Indigenous communities, stated Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson on May 20th. David Omogoitok, co-chair of West Kitikmeot Resources Corporation, described the project's dual significance directly. This contribution from Natural Resources Canada will not only support critical minerals development in the West Kitikmeot region, but also create jobs and business opportunities in our communities and make land and marine transportation safer and more reliable. It reinforces Inuit and Canadian sovereignty over the Northwest Passage. That phrase, sovereignty over the Northwest Passage, is the geopolitical dimension of what is otherwise presented as a mining infrastructure project. Grays Bay sits on the Arctic coast of Nunavut, on the waters of the Northwest Passage. A deepwater port at that location is not only an export terminal for zinc and copper, it is a permanent, year-round Canadian operational presence on the most strategically contested maritime route in the Western Hemisphere. The United States considers the Northwest Passage an international waterway open to all navigation without Canadian permission. Canada considers those waters internal Canadian waters, requiring authorization for foreign transit. The legal dispute has existed for decades in the abstract. A functioning deepwater port operated by an Inuit-led Canadian company on those waters converts the abstract into the operational. Grays Bay is not the only infrastructure node in Canada's Arctic build-out. The March 12th Yellowknife announcement established the full architecture. The $40 billion package covered $32 billion in military investments, expanding operational capacity at forward operating locations in Yellowknife, Inuvik, Iqaluit, and Goose Bay, the four bases that give the Canadian Armed Forces year-round presence across the Arctic's primary strategic approach corridors. The remaining investment covered transportation, energy, and logistics infrastructure, including the Canadian Arctic Economic and Security Corridor, a proposed 400-kilometer all-season road through the Slave Geological Province to the Nunavut border connecting to the Grays Bay Road and hydroelectric capacity expansion, adding 60 megawatts to the Northwest Territories power grid. The defense dimension expanded in May when Canada deepened Arctic security ties with Nordic allies. Canada joined Norway, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Iceland in a framework of enhanced military cooperation covering surveillance sharing, joint exercises, and interoperability, specifically focused on the High North security environment. That Nordic alignment coming weeks after Carney announced Canada can no longer rely on the United States for its Arctic security places Canada inside a European-led Arctic security architecture for the first time. The United States paused the Permanent Joint Board on Defense in 2026, the 86-year-old bilateral body that had historically served as the primary Canada-US forum for continental security coordination. Canada's response was to deepen ties with European Arctic nations rather than waiting for the bilateral forum to resume. Russian military activity in the Arctic is the documented threat environment driving all of this. Russia operates the world's largest fleet of nuclear and diesel-powered icebreakers, 46 vessels compared to Canada's one operational heavy icebreaker. Russia has modernized its Arctic military infrastructure continuously. Since 2014, rebuilding Soviet-era bases on the Kola Peninsula, Franz Josef Land, Novaya Zemlya, and the New Siberian Islands, and extending patrol ranges for strategic bombers and deploying hypersonic missile-capable fighters into Arctic sectors. Russia's Northern Fleet has been reorganized into a full military district with its own command structure. The Arctic Ocean that Canada's northern coast faces is no longer a frozen buffer. It is an operational theater where adversary forces are active and Canadian detection capabilities have documented gaps. The Coast Guard received its own dedicated Arctic security expansion on May 22, 2020, $816 million, over 7 years, covering 4 initiatives. A year-round maritime domain awareness hub in Iqaluit, reconnaissance equipment on Coast Guard helicopters, 4 new Arctic long-range radar sites along the Northwest Passage and Hudson Strait, and procurement of short and medium-range drones for air, surface, and underwater operations. 4 radar sites positioned along the Northwest Passage itself create the surveillance architecture that makes any claim of sovereignty over those waters operationally meaningful rather than purely legal. The Grays Bay project's federal funding of up to $50 million through the First and Last Mile Fund, supported by $1.5 billion in total federal funding announced in Budget 2025, is a planning and pre-construction allocation, not a construction contract. The full Grays Bay Road and Port project will require substantially larger investment to construct the road and port infrastructure. The Major Projects Office referral means the federal government has committed to streamlining regulatory processes and identifying broader funding solutions to accelerate timelines. The pre-construction work will incorporate Inuit Kaujimajatuqangit traditional Inuit knowledge alongside early engagement and capacity building to advance Indigenous leadership and local employment. The mining sector context gives the Grays Bay Port its commercial foundation. Canada's minerals and metals sector directly employed 438,000 individuals in 2024 and indirectly supported an additional 286,000 for a total of 724,000 workers. The Slave Geological Province holds deposits of zinc, copper, gold, and other minerals that remain commercially inaccessible without the road and port corridor Grays Bay would provide. As global demand for critical minerals rises across electric vehicle battery production, defense electronics, and clean energy infrastructure, stranded deposits with no route to market represent the specific gap that Arctic infrastructure spending is designed to close. A deepwater Arctic port on Canadian territory, 4 surveillance radar sites along the Northwest Passage, $32 billion in military base expansion at 4 forward operating locations, a 400-kilometer Arctic road connecting mineral deposits to the coast, Nordic defense partnerships replacing a paused bilateral forum with the United States. Canada is not discussing Arctic sovereignty. It is building it.